good to see a whole bunch of you that's come back this evening. Jude's a little book, but it's got lots of powerful meaning. I hope to flesh out some of it for us this evening on a phrase or text that's probably fairly familiar. I was told many years ago in my mother's presence that, and I'm pretty sure it was not complimentary, but they said, you know what, Jeff, when they made you, they broke the mold. And it wasn't a compliment. They were just saying it's a good thing there's not more of me. Now, Mom corrected them and said, no, they probably just started with a broken mold, and that's just the way he is. Well, thanks, Mom. That really helped my confidence there, son. But we are all different, and it's a good thing. I love the concept of unity. In fact, I really am so happy that Boyce led that song about fellowship and about faith and about unity that we have together. I love that, but let's not disregard the fact that we are all extremely different. And it's a difference that's pointed out by Jude. Who would know about kind of some of the regrets you have in life and how well somebody receives something that's true? Think about this. Jude was Jesus' half-brother. During the course of Jesus' life, Jude was not a believer. As a matter of fact, he was quite the opposite pole. He was always ridiculing, making fun of, dishonoring his half-brother and the claim that he was God's son. It was not until after you find him probably in the gathering of the 120 in the room, and he was probably one of the ones that was up there with them, and now he's writing, and so I can understand why James, the book prior to this, who was Jesus' half-brother, and I like James because James gets right to the point. He don't mind cutting to the quick. He states it the way it is. Jude's pretty much the same way. And I've discovered that people who have made tragic errors in their life and look at themselves and say, you dummy, what were you thinking, have very little patience for others. And what's amazing, as blunt as James is a text like this in Jude's letter. It says you need to make some distinctions between people. People are different. Now, there's a couple of implications here that we need to understand. One is the fact that people receive things differently. I love reading psychological stuff, and it's amazing some of the different types of learning skills that people have and the learning methods by which people learn better. Some people are good at just reading a book, and they got it. Other people need pictures. Some of us, it doesn't matter which you use, we're just slow. But nevertheless, we all learn in a different way, and it's amazing how many different ways we learn. It works the same way with how we receive information that is contrary to what we've always thought or always known or have lived by for so long that there's no way to save face. Once it's presented to us, we got to say, oops, I was wrong. Whether it's, just 15 minutes ago or all my life. And frankly, that's not an easy thing to do, and some people don't do it quite as quickly as others. Very often, that learning curve we talk about is much longer for some than for others. But it exists, or Jude would not have written it. For some, you have compassion. For others, you say by fear. He makes a distinction between two types of people. And the other implication, of course, is the fact that I could have no clue what your learning curve is like, how you would or would not take instruction of some kind, let alone something might be a little negative. I wouldn't have a clue if I didn't know you. I've never been one to knock doors. I don't think it's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. Don't misquote me. I think sometimes knocking doors is a great thing, but I've never been a big fan of knocking doors because the folks that are religious that have knocked on my doors before, now, of course, I'm different than most. I don't slam the door and tell them to go away. I invite them in and break my Bible out, and that kind of scares them. But nevertheless, I am of the opinion that most folks that knock doors take great pride in the rejection they receive. And I know this because I've been told this by a couple that thought it was a wonderful thing for me to reject them. They were just shocked that I would invite them in. But different people take things in different ways, and we have to be aware of that. The only way we can be aware of that is if we know our audience. That's one of the reasons, while it is not in the Bible anywhere, that preachers are commanded. Paul never told Timothy or Titus, you go visit people, okay? Never said that. And unfortunately, I've heard preachers say, that's not my job. My job is to study and read books and then present a lesson. No. Speech 101, know your audience. You need to know who you're talking to. Because the point of your speaking to them is not to just get up and regurgitate data that you've studied, okay? If you love people, you want to reach them in the best possible way. Hence the difficulty I have when I preach. Because some of you take the truth and you want it right straight in your face. Not everybody does that really well. Some people do not want it straight in their face. In fact, it's hurtful. It's not conducive to a desire for somebody to change their life when you just dump on them like that. That's what Jude is talking about here. But the responsibility here, I want you to note, is not on those who receive the message. It's on those of us who are going to give the message. So don't kid yourself. I'm preaching to Jeff tonight in a big way. Because I've only been here a couple of years, and I'm still learning people. And I have made my mistakes, believe me, in conveying a message to people and trying to get it right. Not just with members of the Lord's body, but I mean the community. There are things I look back and say, oh, I wish I'd have said that smoother. Or I wish I hadn't have said that and waited till later when they got to know me a little better and said it then. It is a struggle, and we understand that to be the case, and that is one of the struggles we have that Jude is addressing here. There's different ways to approach different people. You got to know the people, but once you do, you have to approach them. And the end game is we're going to approach them, okay? That's a given. In fact, that's really what Jude is getting at here, because in the bulk of his epistle, he's telling us about how false teachers are so effective. And that's kind of a different slant to look at it when you look at Jude, because it's a condemnation of false teachers. All of Jude is. But frankly, he's telling us why false teachers are so effective. And what he's telling us, as a counter to that, we need to be effective. And here's how we can do that. Now, the thing we start with in verse 20 is how we address ourselves. Then, if we address ourselves, we're better able to address others. And by the way, that's kind of comes from Matthew 7, where we talk about getting the beam out of our own eye before we start picking at splinters in somebody else's. Yeah, we need to take care of ourselves, and so therefore that's the way Jude goes about it. He must have listened to Jesus somewhere along the line. But you, beloved, building yourselves up, that's number one. You need to build yourself up in the most holy faith. You need to know your book. You're not ever going to be able to approach anyone properly if you don't know how to approach people. And by the way, Jesus is our perfect example on how to approach people. I'm going to give some illustration of that here in a few moments. But secondly, pray in the Holy Spirit. We need to be a praying people. Our success will come because Jesus offers us, God offers us opportunities that we need to be able to see and pick up on. And third, we have to keep ourselves in the love of God. And that's where it really comes down, where the rubber meets the road. Because you know what? I've talked to some people right here in this community, which they're great people until you disagree with them religiously. And then all of a sudden, there is an animal that comes out you would never have guessed was in there. And they say things to you that you're going, wow, and you call yourself a Christian and you're saying this to me. And then you have to look at yourself and say, but I still love their soul. I'm going to respond in a way that will help them understand no matter what you say, whether you're my enemy, I will love you. That's Jesus' words. And so we got to work on ourselves. We have to know what to say, know our faith. We have to count on God, and through His providence help us to have the opportunities to say. And then finally, we need to be sure that we always are instilled with the love of God. Now we can make some distinctions. And here's the first one he brings out. On some, so right off the bat, one size does not fit all, okay? Some, we need to have compassion, making a distinction. One of the best examples, I want to use Jesus as much as I can in these examples, illustrations, because Jesus, master teacher, knew how to approach people. Now, he had an added benefit that we don't have. He read people's minds. Okay, we don't got that. We don't have that. So therefore, we're not going to be quite as adept as he was. But let's look at what he did in some occasions. When Nicodemus came to him by night, and there's a great mystery surrounding all that, and that's just a speculation we can run with forever, but he came to him by night, okay, and he came in and he said, we know you're from God because nobody can do these things except you're from God. John 3. And Jesus chided him a little, but taught him ever so gently. and told him, after he told him you need to be born again, and he didn't get it, you're a teacher and you're not getting this? Now, whether you realize it or not, that was a reprimand. But it was so gentle, it's almost hard to see it as a reprimand. But he's telling him, you're a teacher, you're wise, you know stuff, and here you are not getting this. Jesus was implying, this is kind of simple actually, you should be getting this. Now contrast that with the end game in Matthew 23. And I've always thought this was an interesting diatribe because I don't know whether you catch it or not, but at the beginning of chapter 3, it follows chapter 22 where he addresses the lawyers, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, and then poses a question to them that they can't answer, which embarrasses them publicly. But notice in chapter 23, when he goes through that list of things about the Pharisees, do you realize he's not addressing the Pharisees? He's not even talking to the Pharisees. And you want to talk about a slap. Jesus is fed up with talking to them. He's talked to them all through Matthew 22. He's done now. He turns to the audience now, and he says, you know these guys over here? And by the way, this is authority for you and I, when we speak of truth and falsehoods, to point out someone by name like he did, these Pharisees, this sect of the Pharisees. I know there is an appropriate time and an inappropriate time to stand in the pulpit and talk about a denomination by name. I know that that can be a very delicate thing. And I don't make a habit of it because I don't want to offend those who have the possibility of coming around to the truth. But there is no sin in standing before you and telling you this Calvinism we talk about is a Baptist doctrine. I make no apology for that. Jesus certainly didn't. When he said, you see these Pharisees? They sit in Moses' seat. When they tell you to do something, you do what they say, but don't do what they do. Now, look at the contrast between the way he approached the Pharisee, Nicodemus, and the Pharisees in 23. You know, he made the distinction there between the two. And he was very blunt with one and very kind and gentle with another. The judgment we have to exercise has to do a lot with how well you know somebody. And my question would be, how well do you think Jesus knew the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the leaders of the Jewish people by the end of his sojourn on this planet? He knew them well. He had had multiple run-ins with them. One of the ones that I bring up very often is in John the 8th chapter. And I've always liked this because it has one of those significant things that occurs where most people look at it as though he is being gentle on that poor woman caught in the very act of adultery and brought in, and who knows the disheveled position she may have been in had she was caught in the act. And they drug her out right there in public, threw her down in the synagogue, right in front of everybody in the temple. And so now Jesus decides, Deuteronomy 22 tells us we're supposed to kill her. What do you think? Now, first off, Jesus ignored the challenge. And as they pressed him, he finally said in verse 7, chapter 8, verse 7 of John, you that is without sin among you, cast the first stone. And then he squatted back down, started scribbling on the ground. That's the only time, by the way, that we have any record of Jesus ever writing anything. We don't even know what he wrote. But here's an example where people look immediately and say, look how genteel, how wonderful he was with the woman caught in adultery. Go and sin no more. Okay? Because all your detractors have gone. But let me throw in this caveat. Look how gently he dealt with some fellows who had ugliness at the very core of their being when they challenged Jesus with this circumstance. And look how he dealt with it. I'm here to tell you, sometimes when people get all bent out of shape, that's one of the expressions we use for people being angry at some truth. And we believe that the proper response is to turn around with as much vim and vigor and get right back in their face, may not be the right answer. Okay? Very often people don't realize what they've proposed or what they are standing with and what they're trying to defend. And they've been taught sometimes these things all of their life, and they just can't believe somebody doesn't swallow it like they have. And then when somebody confronts them with the bald truth of the matter, it's a hard pill to swallow. You'll notice in John 8, the ones who left first were the older, wiser ones, and then the younger ones easily, stirred up and exaggerated and so forth, they started drifting off. I look at this incident and I look at Jesus having great compassion on both the lady caught in adultery and the crowd. An interesting time when Jesus saw that there is a distinction to be made in how one deals with somebody on these kinds of matters. That certainly wasn't the issue in Matthew 23 where he dealt with it straight head. It wasn't the issue when he stood before some of the chief priests and so forth and told them, why are you slapping me when it's against the law? And not answering them when they asked him questions, which was basically would be perceived as a rudeness, but not from Jesus. He just knew it wouldn't do any good to talk to them anymore. We need to make distinctions when we talk to people. Now, here's how that rubber meets the road works really well for people here in Hamilton that's been here since dirt, okay? Or you've been wherever you've been for a long time. You know people. You know them better than I do. In fact, I get tickled sometimes when I've moved into some of the communities that my work's like St. Joe and in Jacksboro. Oh, we're so glad we've got a preacher here. You can go out in the community, you can do some great work. Wait a minute. I don't know these people. I don't know how to approach them. But let me throw the monkey on your back. You do. You know who they are. You know how much they can take. You know what you can get away with saying with. They've been watching you, and of course that gets back to the question of how you been living. Have they been watching the Christian all this time and will listen to you because, yeah, that guy's a Christian, you can tell by the way he acts? We all have the opportunity to make these distinctions that Jude talks about as we speak to people every day about what's the most important thing in their entire existence, and that is being God's child. So we need to make distinctions. The two distinctions made, some have compassion. Okay, some folks, you just got to go gentle. You got to go easy. Jesus could do that. In fact, I think very often when he would make a statement like, "Oh, ye of little faith," in my mind, I'm sitting here looking at him, rolling his eyes and shaking his head. That's the body language I can see him doing because of the way he approached them. I mean, walking across the water after Peter gets out of the boat and walks toward him for a little while, to have to reach down and grab him by the arm because "Oh Lord, I'm sinking." For him to say, "Oh, ye of little faith." I mean, that would be a time where Dad would have taken me to the barn back in the back and taken me out because I didn't do what he told me to do. Jesus was so kind and so compassionate. But there were times when he snatched people out of the fire, and he did so very bluntly and straightforward. I think sometimes we don't see how blunt it could have been on people, except for their reaction as it's recorded when Jesus is approached by a rich young ruler. And Jesus tells him, "Well, you need to keep the law and you need to do these things." "Oh, I've done that since my youth." That tells you right off the bat, he knew that he had some shortcoming because he was doing what the law said, but he still had some shortcoming. And Jesus did not mince words. Sell what you got. He knew where the chink in that boy's armor was. Sell what you got. You come follow me. The young man went away sorrowful. Now think about why and how that scenario transpired. How did that occur? What was the expression on the young man's face? Well, that hit him like a brick between the eyes because he was wealthy. And what you're asking me to do is give up everything. Can't imagine how tough that would have been. But to save a person, maybe sometimes it's worth telling them straight up, this is the way it is. It is a judgment call when it comes down to it. But I want you to note the little phrase in verse 23. I've always liked that little phrase that's added. Some have compassion, making distinction. Okay, that's a given. But in 23, others you save with fear, pulling them from the fire. But what do you hate? And I think this is intentionally put in there because you don't hate the person. The person is a soul, misguided though they may be, totally confused or lost in their situation where they are. But that is a soul for whom Christ died. You hate the garment that is defiled by the flesh, not the person. And sometimes it's very difficult to make the distinction between the two. We have a record of people not being able to make that distinction. Because when Stephen stood up and told them, "You guys are just as stubborn as your daddies were," they took him out and stoned him. They confused the message with the person. Because killing Stephen didn't change the truth he taught one whit. let's face it, they tried to kill Jesus, and it didn't take. We got to make a distinction between persons and doctrine. And when we teach people, understand that if they're set in their ways, it's going to be tough to dislodge them from an old, familiar, comfortable habit. You understand that going in, and sometimes you just have to push a button to get it done. It is a judgment call, and that's one of the interesting things about this. If we are strong in our faith, and we have lots of good examples and understand them from Jesus, and Paul, and Peter, how they dealt with people, and we also are praying constantly for the guidance of God through His providence to get it right, and we also have the love of God in us for that person's soul, it's going to affect how we make this distinction. But what never is stated there and is not authorized is, oh, there's no hope, we give up. I'm sorry, that's not in the book. It's never in the book, you give up. I realize sometimes the Bible says, don't cast your pearls before swine. Okay? But I don't think that's a dismissal in the sense that you never talk to them again. You never bring them again. You never broach the issue because their soul is so valuable that you can't just leave it lay. When we approach people, it's a very difficult, it's a hard thing, and I'll guarantee you this, just speaking from experience, you will not get better at it until you practice how to approach people. If you've never approached people, get ready for failure. You're going to fail. But it's okay. Because if your heart is right and you're trying to do your best, you will get better as you practice. I think part of the reason we don't evangelize well in churches of Christ today is we quit. I think sometime back we quit. We just decided we're happy with who we have. Let's keep house. Let's just do what we always do, and let's just recognize that they're not one of us and we're just our own. And we've forgotten that we are to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. It is our duty, our job to reach out to those who are lost. And the reason is we love them. We care about them. And that's why we invest our time in them, to know who they are, so that we can speak to them the best we know how to get them to understand how beautiful heaven is going to be. And how much we long for them to join us there when we get there. If you're not a member of the body of Christ, you need to be. If you are and you're not living right, you need to change that. You need to rethink the way you look at how you interact with your neighbors, friends, concerning the gospel. You can make a change. We invite the song as we stand together and sing.